My good people of Africa and in the diaspora, something we are all familiar with but strange just happened. A wind of mixed feelings coming from our embassies. Yes, student visa suspension has once again become that wind. Sit tight, because what I am about to share with you today is one of the most quietly devastating policy decisions to come out of a Western capital in recent months. And I need you to pay close attention, because this is not just a story about paperwork and immigration categories. This is a story about what happens when a foreign government decides overnight that your children's futures are negotiable and nobody asks your permission first. The United Kingdom has suspended student visas from 4 specific countries: Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar, and Sudan. Applications that were moving through the system are now frozen. Offer letters that once felt like golden tickets now sit in the mail inboxes. Half useful, half meaningless. Thousands of study plans, years of saving, preparing, sacrificing, thrown into chaos by a single announcement framed as an emergency brake. And I'll be honest with you, that is not a technical adjustment. That is a government reaching into the lives of families on another continent and pressing pause on their futures without warning, without consultation, and without apology. And that alone tells you something. This was not administrative housekeeping. This was a signal. But signals are not just about what they say, they are about what they reveal. So today, we are not just reacting, we are examining what exactly did the UK do? Who does it hurt? What is London really trying to achieve here? And is this really about asylum numbers? Or is it about power, leverage, and who gets to decide whose dreams are expendable? Because dignity is not preserved in press releases, it is tested in policy. And to understand whether this policy is about managing a system or punishing the vulnerable, we need to examine the full picture here. Now let us break this down. Welcome to today's show. If this is your first time joining us, you're highly welcome. My name is P. Solomon, and this is where we center Africa in today's global affairs with analysis, not with emotions, not structure, and definitely not slogans. Now, before we get into today's story, some very quick housekeeping. Our analytics show that a significant number of our regular viewers are not yet subscribed to the channel. Why is that? So please, take a second, subscribe, and tap that notification bell for alerts, and let us quickly warm up the charts. Drop where you are tuning in from and tell us, has this visa decision affected anyone in your family or community? We want to hear those stories. We want to keep each other informed. So, let us establish the facts, because context is everything. And if you do not understand how these decisions landed on real people, you will not understand why it matters as much as it does. The announcement dropped like a late-night news ticker. The language was clinical. Emergency brake. Spike in asylum. Claims linked to student routes. System pressure. On the surface, it sounded like policy management. But in reality, it landed like a hammer. Applications that were being processed frozen. Families who rearranged their entire financial lives left stranded. Students who had completed medical examinations, paid deposits, booked accommodation, and started saying goodbye to everyone they loved, woke up to discover that a single line in a government update had pushed everything into limbo. Picture the profile of one of these students, early 20s, first in the family to travel abroad, accepted into a STEM course or a nursing program, carrying not just personal ambitions, but the weight and expectation of an entire household. For months, every decision revolved around that departure date. The date is now gone, replaced by uncertainty, silence, and rumors that nobody in government is bothering to clarify. And this is what I need you to understand. This is not about one visa or one visa form being rejected. This is about futures paused with no clear restart button. Entire households are exposed. Money that cannot easily be recovered is stuck in a process that may never resume. In communities where one person studying abroad can transform the trajectory of many, this policy lands like a cut to the collective hope. Now, let us look at the list, because who is on it tells you more than the announcement itself ever will. On paper, the suspension looks neutral. It does not shout any country name in bold letters. It speaks instead in categories and triggers, a language designed to sound distant from human life. But once you look closer, the 4 countries named share patterns. The UK would rather not spell out in public. They come from regions already under pressure. At least 2 are African nations, which is Cameroon and Sudan, dealing with economic crisis, political instability, or ongoing insecurity. Others sit in the wider global south, places where youth populations are growing fast and opportunities at home are shrinking just as quickly. These are countries where students see foreign education not as a luxury, but as an escape route, a survival strategy, a long-term investment for the entire family. But in UK debates, these realities are flattened into a single label: high risk. Instead of being treated as individual partners with specific histories and contributors, these states are grouped together as a block of concern. Their students become statistics instead of migration charts. Their ambitions are reduced to lines in a graph labeled pressure or risk of overstay. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because this is where domestic politics in London quietly collide with the dreams of young people, thousands of miles away. Inside the UK, there is constant noise about taking back control, lowering net migration, and showing toughness at the border. When that pressure rises, it becomes easier to reach for countries that have less power to push back, less leverage to negotiate exemptions, and weaker media coverage to challenge the narrative. Because once you look beyond the press release, this is not only a visa decision, it is a signal in a much bigger power game, and students are just the first visible casualties. Now, let me talk about the human cost, because this is where we move from policy language to lived reality. And I think this is important because the responsible position is not detached commentary. It is honesty about what this does to people. There is the aspiring engineer, for example, from West Africa, who took evening jobs, skipped social life, and carefully built a profile for a UK university that promised cutting-edge laboratories. There is the nurse in training, who saw a British qualification as a way to support family members back home and to gain skills urgently needed in local hospitals. There is a postgraduate researcher who planned to return with expertise that could strengthen a fragile education system. For many of them, the cost of reaching this point was enormous. Families sold plots of lands, cars, or livestock. Parents dipped into retirement savings. Some students took loans from relatives and community groups, promising to repay once they started earning abroad. Application fees, visa charges, language tests, accommodation deficits. Each step drained resources in countries where every dollar matters. Now, with the visa route suddenly blocked, it is not just personal disappointment on the line. Money that cannot easily be recovered is locked in a process that may never restart. And in communities where one person studying abroad can transform the future of many, this is not an inconvenience. This is a financial crisis compressed into a single household. And that brings me to a question that I think is very crucial. If the human cost is this heavy, who actually gains from shutting this door? To answer that, you have to step into the mindset of UK policymakers. And I will be honest with you, the picture is not flattering at all. Inside the UK, student routes have quietly moved from being celebrated as a symbol of global influence to being questioned as a backdoor into long-term settlements. For years, international students helped universities fill funding gaps, helped campuses diverse, and generated billions in revenue. But as net migration figures climbed, student visas began to appear in political speeches, radio debates, and tabloid headlines. The narrative shifted from global talent to system under strain. Spouses, dependents, post-study work routes, every piece of the system became a potential target for those demanding quick reductions. And in that environment, non-European countries, especially in Africa and parts of Asia, becomes the easiest places to act fast. They have less power to retaliate, fewer channels to shape, and they have limited leverage over trade or security ties. Suspending student visas from 4 of such countries like Afghanistan, Cameroon, Sudan, and Myanmar sends a message to the domestic audience. The government is acting. The numbers are being controlled. The border is being defended. At the same time, London can still claim that the system is fair and rules-based, pointing to categories and thresholds instead of naming the politics behind that very decision. The language stays technical, but the impact is deeply human and heavily targeted. And here is what I keep coming back to. While London is playing to its home audience, African governments and families are forced to ask a harder question. If the UK can shut the door this fast, is it time to stop chasing this door at all? Now, let me take you to a deeper conversation, because this visa suspension has exposed something that has been quietly shaping Africa's relationship with the West for decades. And we need to talk about it honestly. For years, countless African families, mostly from the affected nations like Sudan and Cameroon, have poured money, talents, and hope into sending their brightest students abroad. Even as local systems struggle and economies weakened, it became an unofficial strategy. When jobs are scarce and institutions fall, education overseas is seen as a lifeline. This is what people mean by brain drain. The most driven students, the future doctors, engineers, researchers, leave to train in foreign classrooms. Many never return, or come back only after a long period abroad. Their skills strengthen the host countries, while their home nations lose the very people needed to fix the broken sector and build stronger economies. And the UK has been one of the primary destinations in this story. British universities markets. They market themselves aggressively in African cities, promising quality, prestige, and pathways to better opportunities. Families respond by sacrificing on a scale that is hard to measure. Over time, this creates a quiet dependency. Local education is seen as second choice. The sudden visa suspension exposes how fragile that model really is. A system that took years of belief and planning can be disrupted by a single announcement from a foreign capital. And it underlines a hard truth that I think every African family needs to hear. When another government holds the key to your children's future, they also hold silent power over your society. That is not a partnership that is dependable. That is a dependency. And dependencies can be severed without notice. And that brings us to what I think is the most important part of this conversation, because something unexpected is happening. And I want you to hear it. As the UK handles its stance, students and families are quietly redrawing their own maps. The old assumption that the UK is the only, or, for lack of a better word, best route is beginning to crack, especially among those who have just watched carefully hard laid plans collapse overnight. Alternative destinations are gaining attention. European countries with clearer post-study options, Asian nations investing heavily in international education, and even intra-African universities that are starting to build stronger reputation. These are appearing on short lists that once had only London, Manchester, and Edinburgh on their radar. Online and blended programs, once dismissed as inferior, are now being reconsidered as practical options when physical borders become unpredictable. And this very shift links into a wider Pan-African moment. Regional blocs are exploring ways to harmonize qualifications. New institutions and scholarship schemes aim to keep more talent in the continent, or at least within networks that benefit African development directly. For families in Afghanistan, Myanmar, Sudan, and Cameroon, bound by this sudden UK decision, the conversation is changing. Instead of asking only, how do we get out? More people are starting to ask, what are we building here? And which partners treat us as equals, not as risks? It is a slow shift, but let me tell you something. It is very real. And it is being accelerated by exactly the kind of policy shock we are discussing today. So, let me take you to a history lesson, because this is not the first time a Western power has used administrative tools to control who moves and who stays. And history has something important to teach us about the pattern. In the early 20th century, colonial administrations across Africa implemented pass laws and movement restrictions, systems designed to control where African people could go, where they could work, and what opportunities they could access. The language was always bureaucratic, always technical, always framed as management, order, or protection of the system. But the effect was always the same, limiting the mobility of people based not on their ability or character, but on where they came from. Now, I am not saying the UK visa suspension is colonialism. No, that would be an oversimplification. But the structural logic has echoes that we cannot ignore. A distant capital makes a decision. People with less power absorb the consequences. And the language of the announcement is designed to make it sound neutral when the impact is anything but. The lesson from history is this: whenever your people's mobility depends entirely on another government's political calendar, you are vulnerable. And vulnerability without alternatives is dependency. The question for Africa today is the same question it has faced for over a century. Do we build our own systems, our own institutions, our own centers of excellence, our own pathways to opportunity, or do we continue to rely on doors that can be closed without warning? And that brings me to the honest assessment, because here is what I think we need to be clear about. When the dust settles, the people hit hardest by this policy are not policymakers in London or politicians at home. They are the students caught between two systems that see them as numbers, not lives. On one side, a government keen to show control over migration. On the other, home states that have long relied on foreign education as an unofficial pressure valve instead of investing seriously in domestic institutions. Those most affected are often from low-income families who stretched beyond their limits to fund applications, deposits, and travel plans. They come from countries marked as high risks, where any instability at home is quickly tied to suspicion abroad. For many of them, this was not just a study plan. It was the once-in-a-generation ladder their entire household was climbing together. By contrast, those with wealth, multiple passport options, or networks in other countries can absorb the shock. They pivot to different destinations, delay for a year, or switch strategies entirely. And the gap between who can adjust and who is left stranded quietly widens, as it always does when powerful countries make sweeping decisions about vulnerable population. So now, my people, I turn to the real question, and I want you to think carefully about this, because this is not only a story about immigration bureaucracy. It is a question of justice and power. Who gets to move? Who gets to learn where they choose? Whose future can be paused overnight to send a political message to a domestic audience that will never know their names? And more importantly, what should Africa's response be? Because here is where I think we need to be honest with ourselves. It is easy to direct all our anger at London. And some of that anger is justified. But if we are being truthful with ourselves, we also have to ask, why are our systems still in a position where a single foreign visa decision can destabilize thousands of families? Why have we not built the institutions, the universities, the research centers, the training pipelines that make our countries the first choice, not the fallback? The UK did not create Africa's brain drain. It exploited it. And the solution to exploitation is not to beg for better treatment from the exploiter. It is to build something of your own that cannot be taken away. Now, here is the honest position. This visa suspension may close one chapter, but it also exposes the fault lines in how global education and migration truly work. The real question now is whether African societies will treat this as another humiliation to endure, or as a wake-up call to redesign the future on their own terms. If African governments respond by investing seriously in domestic education, by building institutions that can compete globally, by creating environments where their best and brightest want to stay, then this very moment becomes a turning point. If they respond with outrage this week and return to the same dependency next month, then nothing changes. And the next time a Western capital closes a door, believe me, the pain will be exactly the same. Our responsibility is not to rage. It is not to despair. It is to examine, because in geopolitics, power does not move loudly. It moves quietly through visa categories and policy thresholds. And the policies that follow this suspension, both in London and in Africa's capital, will tell us more than the suspension itself. So, we watch carefully. We demand accountability. From London, yes, but also from our own governments. And we remain clear-eyed, my people, because this is how serious nations should think. And Africa, in this very moment, is being forced to decide whether it wants to keep asking for seats in someone else's lecture hall or start building its own. So now I turn it over to you. Do you believe this visa suspension should be a wake-up call for African governments to invest in homegrown education and opportunity? Or do you think the focus should remain on fighting for access to Western institutions? And more importantly, what would you need to see from your own government to believe it is serious about keeping talent at home? Because leadership is not just about decisions others make about you. It is about the decisions you make for yourself. And I think in this moment, that is everything. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let us have a serious conversation, not from emotions, but from a strategy standpoint. I want to hear your perspectives. I'll be reading your comments and featuring some of them in future episodes. So my people, that is it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for thinking with me. If you found value in today's analysis, do not keep it to yourself. Share it in your group chats and invite them to join us here as we break it down together. And do not forget, please subscribe and press that notification bell. My name is Solomon, and until next time, take care.